So today we're talking about conversion therapy, reintegrative therapy, and reparative therapy. Can you kind of walk us through what are each of those buckets and the theories behind them?
Yes, so it can be really difficult to identify what we're talking about when we talk about conversion therapy versus reparative therapy versus reintegrative therapy. And there are some similarities, but there's some important differences. So with conversion therapy, what we find is an assumption that attraction is kind of like a light switch that we can turn on or off through therapeutic intervention. So the goal is using therapeutic modalities to actually manipulate or change orientation and attraction and to kind of cultivate heterosexuality in a person over time.
Now, I know from her own video that when she's using the term conversion therapy, she's referring to all forms of counseling, and probably ministry, to assist people with unwanted SSA explore change in sexual thoughts, feelings, and behavior. So with all that said, this idea of conversion therapy being like a light switch, I don't know where she's getting this from. Nicolosi Sr. never taught that. He always gave a general synopsis of seeing 1/3 of clients experiencing no change, 1/3 experiencing significant change, and 1/3 experiencing complete change. Now, I know this was kind of not an official statistic. It was more just a general synopsis of what he observed, so we take it with a grain of salt. Fortunately, we had the Peel and Sutton studies show more detail, but we also have other evidence from other research. Nicolosi Jr. doesn't teach light switch idea. It's literally in our training materials that experiencing change in sexuality is not like a light switch, but more like a light dimmer. It's on a continuum.
So now I want us to be very clear. When we're discussing changes in sexual attractions, don't think in terms of flipping a light switch. Now, I know you know this, Andrew. I'm saying this more for other people watching, but don't think in terms of that. Think in terms of rotating a light dimmer. We're talking about gradual shifts of varying degrees. It's important that we don't oversimplify these results or overstate these results. Everyone responds differently. No one can guarantee an outcome. Even small shifts in attraction of a few degrees can help some individuals live in alignment with their values. Every individual has a unique journey, and these interventions might just be a smaller part of that individual's overall life journey.
And
So,
it's funny, if I
please.
could, I was just watching a recent video of someone criticizing the work we do, trying to actually assert that we teach the light switch kind of model.
Oh, yeah?
That so-called reparative therapy or reintegrative therapy or conversion therapy, they teach that you can just change your sexuality like a light switch when you should view it as a dimmer switch. I'm like, that's the opposite of what we say.
Maybe they're watching the video in reverse. Maybe there's like a YouTube option.
It's a core part of how we
way.
explain things in all our teachings
Right.
and our videos. The continuum idea is how I've always understood it. This is what the Jones and Yarhouse longitudinal study of Exodus member ministry participants showed. So if that's the case, where's she getting the light switch idea from? Show me. Bring the receipts, please. We've got decades of Exodus conferences, Restored Hope Network conferences, NARTH, and Alliance for Therapeutic Choice conferences, books by the leaders in ex-gay ministry, Joe Dallas, Andrew Comiskey, Ann Palk, now Ann Edward, Linda Seiler, Ken Williams, Stephen Black. I can go on and on. You won't find a quote from any of them claiming that change from homosexual feelings is something instantaneous. Now, what you will see are testimonies of people who lived in the gay life and that had a radical conversion experience and swore off their old life. And for some, repentance was instant and dramatic. Sure, why not? And there are some who have testified experiencing a relief from preoccupation with sexual temptation, usually immediately after their conversion experience. It's sort of like a period of grace that God gives to get them a taste of freedom. And He helps them with overcoming temptation more, or maybe make it so temptation isn't as tempting during that period. But you won't see any of the major organizations, ministries, or counseling practices in our field promote this as the normal outcome or expectation. Because even when someone has such a radical experience so early on in their journey, the person still needs to follow through with discipleship and deeper inner healing. And this flash in the pan experience is something that we're concerned about. See my interview when I was doing a series of interviews with seasoned ex-gay people. In particular, I was discussing this with Michael Newman.
And in your experience as a licensed clinical psychologist working with clients, the reintegrative, reparative, conversion therapy, that whole mess, does any of it actually work?
So what I would say about that is we have well documented in psychology that there's something called sexual fluidity. So Lisa Diamond, secular researcher, kind of like really the head of looking at sexual fluidity, found especially in female clients and people who were researched over many years that women more often will report a kind of fluidity, an ebb and flow in attraction over time. Now, the key to this is it's natural fluidity. It's not fluidity through intervention. There's kind of a natural ebb and flow in attraction, maybe how people identify, sexual behavior, sexual expression can ebb and flow for people over time. And so that's well documented, okay? If you look at studies that looked at, kind of changes, shifts in attraction over time, for some people, you will see some shifts in attraction over time. Maybe a person who experienced, bisexual attraction might experience an increase in opposite sex attraction. They have the capacity to be in a romantic encounter with somebody of the opposite sex. That can happen sometimes. People share about that. The question becomes, is that natural fluidity, or is that something that's being cultivated through a therapeutic modality? And we can't even say through a therapeutic modality and research in that there's a causal shift from the therapy. We just don't have the capacity in research to be that precise. And so I think it's fair to say that there are people who will experience shifts in attraction over time. One longitudinal study done by Mark Yarhouse and his research team found in ministry groups, so not therapy, but ministry groups, about 30% of people reported some level of shift in attraction over time, but we're talking 70% of people who didn't.
Now, I have a little correction there with some text, but for those who are just listening to this podcast, it would be helpful to hear this as well. That Jones and Yarhouse longitudinal study of participants in different Exodus member ministries actually shows 23% experience what they would consider complete change, which I imagine there's still some degree of SSA that might come up at times. 30% experience significant change, where it's very manageable and not as pressing an issue. 16% experienced minimal change, but they were still committed to the process and they're going to continue doing their work. And then the rest was no change. So this idea that only 30% experienced change, it's not what the study actually showed.